Euthyphro. Scene: the porch of the King Archon. Euthyphro: why have you left the Lyceum, Socrates? And what are you doing in the porch of the King Archon? Surely you cannot be concerned in a suit before the king like myself. Socrates:
not in a suit, Euthyphro. Impeachment is the word which the Athenians use.
What? I suppose that someone has been prosecuting you, for I cannot believe that you are the prosecutor of another.
Certainly not.
Then someone else has been prosecuting you.
Yes.
And who is he?
A young man who is little known, Euthyphro, and I hardly know him. His name is Miletus, and he is the demi of Pythis. Perhaps you may remember his appearance. He has a beak and long straight hair, and a beard which is ill-grown.
No, I do not remember him, Socrates. But what is the charge which he brings against you?
What is the charge? Well, a very serious charge, which shows a good deal of character in the young man, and for which he is certainly not to be despised. He says he knows how the youth are corrupted, and who are the corruptors. I fancy that he must be a wise man, and seeing that I am the reverse of a wise man, he has found me out, and is going to accuse me of corrupting his young friends. And of this our mother the state is to be the judge. Of all our political men, he is the only one who seems to me to begin in the right way, with the cultivation of virtue in youth. Like a good husbandman, he makes the young shoots his first care, and clears away us who are the destroyers of them. This is only the first step. He will afterwards attend to the elder branches, and if he goes on as he has begun, he will be a very great public benefactor.
I hope that he may, but I rather fear, Socrates, that the opposite will turn out to be the truth. My opinion is that in attacking you, he is simply aiming a blow at the foundation of the state. But in what way does he say that you corrupt the young?
He brings a wonderful accusation against me, which at first hearing excites surprise. He says that I am a poet or maker of gods, and that I invent new gods and deny the existence of old ones. This is the ground of his indictment.
I understand, Socrates. He means to attack you about the familiar sign which occasionally, as you say, comes to you. He thinks that you are a neologian, and he is going to have you up before the court for this. He knows that such a charge is readily received by the world, as I myself know too well. For when I speak in the assembly about divine things, and foretell the future to them, they laugh at me and think me a madman. Yet every word that I say is true. But they are jealous of us all, and we must be brave and go at them.
Their laughter, friend Euthyphro, is not a matter of much consequence. For a man may be thought wise, but the Athenians, I suspect, do not much trouble themselves about him until he begins to impart his wisdom to others. And then, for some reason or other, perhaps as you say, from jealousy, they are angry.
I am never likely to try their temper in this way.
I dare say not, for you are reserved in your behavior, and seldom impart your wisdom. But I have a benevolent habit of pouring out myself to everybody, and would even pay for a listener. And I am afraid that the Athenians may think me too talkative. Now, if, as I was saying, they would only laugh at me, as you say that they laugh at you, the time might pass gaily enough in the court, but perhaps they may be in earnest. And then what the end will be, you soothsayers can only predict.
I dare say that the affair will end in nothing, Socrates, and that you will win your cause. And I think that I shall win my own.
And what is your suit, Euthyphro? Are you the pursuer or the defendant?
I am the pursuer.
Of whom?
You will think me mad when I tell you.
Why? Has the fugitive wings?
Nay, he is not very volatile at his time of life.
Who is he?
My father.
Your father? My good man.
Yes.
And of what is he accused?
Of murder, Socrates.
By the powers, Euthyphro, how little does the common herd know of the nature of right and truth. A man must be an extraordinary man and have made great strides in wisdom before he could have seen his way to bring such an action.
Indeed, Socrates, he must.
I suppose that the man whom your father murdered was one of your relatives? Clearly he was, for if he had been a stranger, you would never have thought of prosecuting him.
I am amused, Socrates, at your making a distinction between one who is a relation and one who is not a relation. For surely the pollution is the same in either case. If you knowingly associate with the murderer when you ought to clear yourself and him by proceeding against him. The real question is whether the murdered man has been justly slain. If justly, then your duty is to let the matter alone. But if unjustly, then even if the murderer lives under the same roof with you and eats at the same table, proceed against him. Now, the man who is dead was a poor dependent of mine who worked for us as a field laborer on our farm in Naxos. And one day, in a fit of drunken passion, he got into a quarrel with one of our domestic servants and slew him. My father bound him hand and foot and threw him into a ditch, and then sent to Athens to ask of a diviner what he should do with him. Meanwhile, he never attended to him and took no care about him, for he regarded him as a murderer, and thought that no great harm would be done even if he did die. Now, this was just what happened, for such was the effect of cold and hunger and chains upon him, that before the messenger returned from the diviner, he was dead. And my father and family are angry with me for taking the part of the murderer and prosecuting my father. They say that he did not kill him, and that if he did, the dead man was but a murderer, and I ought not to take any notice, for that a son is impious who prosecutes a father. Which shows, Socrates, how little they know what the gods think about piety and impiety.
Good heavens, Euthyphro! And is your knowledge of religion and of things pious and impious so very exact, that, supposing the circumstances to be as you state them, you are not afraid lest you too may be doing an impious thing in bringing an action against your father?
The best of Euthyphro, and that which distinguishes him, Socrates, from other men, is his exact knowledge of all such matters. What should I be good for without it?
Rare friend, I think that I cannot do better than be your disciple. Then before the trial with Meletus comes on, I shall challenge him, and say that I have always had a great interest in religious questions, and now, as he charges me with rash imaginations and innovations in religion, I have become your disciple. You, Meletus, as I shall say to him, acknowledge Euthyphro to be a great theologian, and sound in his opinions. And if you approve of him, you ought to approve of me, and not have me into court. But if you disapprove, you should begin by indicting him who is my teacher, and who will be the ruin not of the young, but of the old, that is to say, of myself, whom he instructs, and of his old father, whom he admonishes and chastises. And if Meletus refuses to listen to me, but will go on, and will not shift the indictment from me to you, I cannot do better than repeat this challenge in the court.
Yes, indeed, Socrates. And if he attempts to indict me, I am mistaken if I do not find a flaw in him. The court shall have a great deal more to say to him than to me.
And I, my dear friend, knowing this, am desirous of becoming your disciple, for I observe that no one appears to notice you, not even this Meletus, but his sharp eyes have found me out at once, and he has indicted me for impiety. And therefore, I adjure you to tell me the nature of piety and impiety, which you said that you knew so well, and of murder, and of other offenses against the gods. What are they? Is not piety in every action always the same? And impiety again, is it not always the opposite of piety, and always the same with itself, having, as impiety, one notion which includes whatever is impious?
To be sure, Socrates.
And what is piety, and what is impiety?
Piety is doing as I am doing. That is to say, prosecuting anyone who is guilty of murder, sacrilege, or of any similar crime, whether he be your father, or mother, or whoever he may be. That makes no difference, and not to prosecute them is impiety. And please to consider, Socrates, what a notable proof I will give you of the truth of my words, a proof which I have already given to others, of the principle, I mean, that the impious, whoever he may be, ought not to go unpunished. For do not men regard Zeus as the best and most righteous of the gods? And yet they admit that he bound his father Cronos, because he wickedly devoured his sons, and that he too had punished his own father Uranus for a similar reason, in a nameless manner. And yet when I proceed against my father, they are angry with me. So inconsistent are they in their way of thinking when the gods are concerned, and when I am concerned.
May not this be reason, Euthyphro, why I am charged with impiety? That I cannot away with these stories about the gods, and therefore I suppose that people think me wrong. But, as you who are well informed about them approve of them, I cannot do better than assent to your superior wisdom. What else can I say, confessing as I do, that I know nothing about them? Tell me, for the love of Zeus, whether you really believe that they are true.
Oh yes, Socrates, and things more wonderful still, of which the world is in ignorance.
And do you really believe that the gods fought with one another, and had dire quarrels, battles, and the like, as the poets say? And as you may see represented in the works of great artists, the temples are full of them, and notably the robe of Athena, which is carried up to the Acropolis at the great Panathenea, is embroidered with them. Are all these tales of the gods true, Euthyphro?
Yes, Socrates, and as I was saying, I can tell you, if you would like to hear them, many other things about the gods which would quite amaze you.
I dare say, and you shall tell me them at some other time when I have leisure. But just at present, I would rather hear from you a more precise answer which you have not as yet given, my friend, to the question, what is piety? When asked, you only replied, doing as you do, charging your father with murder.
And what I said was true, Socrates.
No doubt, Euthyphro, but you would admit that there are many other pious acts.
There are.
Remember that I did not ask you to give me 2 or 3 examples of piety, but to explain the general idea which makes all pious things to be pious. Do not you recollect that there was one idea which made the impious impious and the pious pious?
I remember.
Tell me what is the nature of this idea, and then I shall have a standard to which I may look, and by which I may measure actions, whether yours or those of anyone else, and then I shall be able to say that such and such an action is pious, such another impious.
I will tell you if you like.
I should very much like.
Piety, then, is that which is dear to the gods, and impiety is that which is not dear to them.
Very good, Euthyphro. You have now given me the sort of answer which I wanted, but whether what you say is true or not I cannot as yet tell, although I make no doubt that you will prove the truth of your words.
Of course.
Come, then, and let us examine what we are saying. That thing or person which is dear to the gods is pious, and that thing or person which is hateful to the gods is impious, these two being the extreme opposites of one another. Was not that said?
It was.
And well said?
Yes, Socrates, I thought so. It was certainly said.
And further, Euthyphro, the gods were admitted to have enmities and hatreds and differences.
Yes, that was also said.
And what sort of difference creates enmity and anger? Suppose, for example, that you and I, my good friend, differ about a number. Do differences of this sort make us enemies and set us at variance with one another? Do we not go at once to arithmetic and put an end to them by a sum?
True.
Or suppose that we differ about magnitudes. Do we not quickly end the difference by measuring?
Very true.
And we end a controversy about heavy and light by resorting to a weighing machine.
To be sure.
But what differences are there which cannot be thus decided, and which therefore make us angry and set us at enmity with one another? I dare say the answer does not occur to you at the moment, and therefore I will suggest that these enmities arise when the matters of difference are the just and unjust, good and evil, honorable and dishonorable. Are not these the points about which men differ, and about which, when we are unable satisfactorily to decide our differences, you and I, and all of us, quarrel, when we do quarrel?
Yes, Socrates. The nature of the differences about which we quarrel is such as you describe.
And the quarrels of the gods, noble Euthyphro, when they occur, are of a like nature.
Certainly they are.
They have differences of opinion, as you say. About good and evil, just and unjust, honorable and dishonorable. There would have been no quarrels among them if there had been no such differences, would there now?
You are quite right.
Does not every man love that which he deems noble and just and good, and hate the opposite of them?
Very true.
But, as you say, people regard the same things, some as just and others as unjust. But these they dispute, and so there arise wars and fightings among them.
Yes, very true.
Then the same things are hated by the gods and loved by the gods, and are both hateful and dear to them?
True.
And upon this view, the same things, Euthyphro, will be pious and also impious.
So I should suppose.
Then, my friend, I remark with surprise that you have not answered the question which I asked. For I certainly did not ask you to tell me what action is both pious and impious, but now it would seem that what is loved by the gods is also hated by them, and therefore, Euthyphro, in thus chastising your father, you may very likely be doing what is agreeable to Zeus, but disagreeable to Cronus, or Uranus, and what is acceptable to Hephaestus, but unacceptable to Hera. And there may be other gods who have similar differences of opinion.
But I believe, Socrates, that all the gods would be agreed as to the propriety of punishing a murderer. There would be no difference of opinion about that.
Well, but speaking of men, Euthyphro, did you ever hear anyone arguing that a murderer or any sort of evildoer ought to be let off?
I should rather say that these are the questions which they are always arguing, especially in courts of law. They commit all sorts of crimes, and there is nothing which they will not do or say in their own defense.
But do they admit their guilt, Euthyphro, and yet say that they ought not to be punished?
No, they do not.
Then there are some things which they do not venture to say and do, for they do not venture to argue that the guilty ought to be unpunished, but they deny their guilt, do they not?
Yes.
Then they do not argue that the evildoer should not be punished, but they argue about the fact of who the evildoer is, and what he did and when?
True.
And the gods are in the same case, if, as you assert, they quarrel about just and unjust, and some of them say, while others deny, that injustice is done among them. For surely neither God nor man will ever venture to say that the doer of injustice is not to be punished.
That is true, Socrates, in the main.
But they join issue about the particulars, gods and men alike, and if they dispute at all, they dispute about some act which is called in question, and by which some is affirmed to be just, and others to be unjust. Is not that true?
This is quite true.
Well then, my dear friend Euthyphro, do tell me, for my better instruction and information, what proof have you that in the opinion of all the gods, a servant who is guilty of murder, and is put in chains by the master of the dead man, and dies because he is put in chains before he who bound him can learn from the interpreters of the gods what he ought to do with him, dies unjustly, and that on behalf of such an one, a son ought to proceed against his father and accuse him of murder? How would you show that all the gods absolutely agree in approving of his act? Prove to me that they do, and I will applaud your wisdom as long as I live.
It will be a difficult task, but I could make the matter very clear to you indeed.
I understand. You mean to say that I am not so quick of apprehension as the judges, for to them you will be sure to prove that the act is unjust and hateful to the gods.